The storm had begun before the first cry. Clouds tore across the sky like ripped cloth, and thunder cracked loud enough to rattle the goats in their pens. It was not the usual wet season storm that came and went with swollen rivers and damp air. This one came like an arrival, a summoning. The trees bent without wind. The air shimmered without heat. The sky pulsed. Inside a narrow mud brick house on the edge of the village, a woman screamed. She screamed through the thunder, through the chants of the midwife, through the snap of the lightning that danced across the thatched roof. Her hands clawed at the sleeping mat, her face soaked not just with sweat but with something deeper, fear maybe, knowledge. The girl came into the world like a lightning bolt, sudden, sharp, and burning. And then her mother died. No reason the midwife could explain. No bleeding. No failing of the breath. Just silence, as if the life had been taken elsewhere. The newborn's wail rose immediately, shrill and strange, while the storm outside stopped mid-rumble, as if it too were listening. The midwife's hand trembled as she wrapped the infant in cloth. The baby's eyes were open. Newborns do not open their eyes that quickly, not like that. But this one did. They were a deep, unnatural gray at first. Then, as the midwife watched, they shifted to amber. And then green. She dropped the cloth. "She is cursed," the midwife whispered. The next morning, the village elders gathered. The house smelled of smoke and afterbirth. The body of the mother had already been taken to the riverside, to be buried with rushes and wrapped in silence. The child lay quiet in a basket, blinking. One of the elders bent close to look at her, and the firelight shifted in the girl's eyes. Red. Only for a moment. But it was enough. "She is not one of us," the elder said. "She is a Sisa. Demon-born." And so the name stuck. Sisa. Not Nala, the name her mother had planned to give her. Not the name whispered in dreams and mid-labor prayers. Sisa. The cursed. The girl whose eyes refused to settle. Her father said nothing. He had sat in the corner through all of it, his eyes far away as if watching the storm even after it had passed. He had been strange before her birth, a silent man with no clear origin, no family nearby, a woodcarver who spoke mostly to trees. But after his wife's death he became quieter still. He took the child in his arms, nodded once and shut the door. From that day on no one saw much of the girl. He raised her in that house at the forest's edge, away from the others, away from the schools and fields and ceremonies. The only time she was seen was when her father came to market, the girl clinging to the edge of his robe, half hidden beneath a scarf, her eyes downcast. People whispered. They claimed animals fled from her. That mirrors cracked when she passed. That her laughter echoed too long. And that sometimes, when no one else was near, the shadows around her moved. Not lengthening like normal shadows. Twisting. It wasn't just that she was strange. It was the house. People passing by swore they heard voices at night. Whispers, soft and overlapping, as if many mouths were trying to speak at once but none could finish the sentence. Some claimed the wall shifted in the moonlight, pulsing like breathing skin. Others said the old fig tree outside had grown limbs in the shape of hands. No one went near. No one dared. Inside the house the girl grew. She learned to read from her father's strange books. Books not written in village script, but in looping glyphs and symbols that looked more like scratches than letters. She knew stories no one had taught her. Names that were never spoken aloud in town. She never asked where they came from. Her father never explained. But at night the shadows moved. At first, it was only at the corners of her vision, something sliding along the base of the wall, vanishing when she turned her head. Then came the shapes. Figures. Not fully formed. Not ghosts. Not spirits. Things made of night itself. They didn't harm her. They watched. Some hovered in corners like tall cloaked figures. Others flickered like candlelight when she breathed. Once, when she cried after stubbing her toe, a thin hand of pure shadow reached from beneath her bed and rested gently on her ankle until she stopped weeping. She told her father once. He only nodded. "They won't hurt you," he said. "They're old. Older than me. Older than this place. Why do they come? They're drawn to what's been forgotten." She didn't understand then. But over time she began to hear them whisper. They spoke in no clear language, but the sound sank into her skin. Into her dreams. Sometimes she would wake and find herself writing symbols in the dust. Once she carved one into the wall while sleepwalking. Her father covered it with fabric and said nothing. As she turned 10, the changes became more visible. Animals refused to come near. Birds wouldn't land on the roof. A neighbor's goat miscarried after grazing too close to the yard. The villagers held another meeting. "She must not enter the school," one woman said. She carries darkness. She will bring death, said another. She already has, a third whispered, thinking of her mother. The council ruled that she be kept from all public gatherings. And so the girl lived a life of silence and shadows. But still the shadows in the house grew bolder. One night, she awoke to find her room flooded in pale blue light. A circle of flickering darkness spun around her bed, and at its center stood a tall figure made entirely of shadow, its face made of shifting stars. She was not afraid. She stepped out of bed. The figure bent slightly, placing one long finger over its mouth, a gesture of silence. Then it pointed to her chest, to her heart, and then to the ceiling where swirling marks appeared like smoke, a language she almost understood. She blinked and the figure was gone. But the marks remained for a while, floating like ash before fading. The next morning she asked her father about the stars in the dark. He paused. "They're not here to harm you," he said. "They're here to remember you. Before this life. Before the storm." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He sighed deeply. "I mean, you are not just mine. You are not just theirs." "Then whose?" He didn't answer. But that night, a shadow placed something beneath her pillow. It was a carved figurine, a woman with many eyes, many arms, and a flame in her mouth. And on the bottom a single word, written in the same strange language from the ceiling. She traced it with her finger. The letters glowed faintly, then disappeared. She did not know what it meant. Not yet. But the shadows whispered it again and again. Nala. The name her mother had whispered before her last breath. Not a Sisa. Not demon. But something ancient. Something returned. There were mirrors in the house. Nala knew that from the start, though she had never seen one clearly. They were always draped in cloth. Brown linen. Black veils. Heavy shawls that hung like dead skin on the walls. Some were nailed into the plaster as if forgotten. Others sat tall in corners behind faded curtains, taller than her and almost as quiet. She once asked her father why they were covered. He had only said, "Some things in this house are better left unseen." That answer satisfied her when she was younger. Back then, most of the house was a puzzle. Too many rooms for two people, too many corners that held cold even when the fire was strong. Her father moved through it like a ghost, his steps light and deliberate. And always, the curtains stayed shut after sunset. As she grew older, her curiosity did too. The shadows still whispered to her, though now they seemed less like creatures and more like echoes, past selves murmuring in corners, crawling from beneath floorboards, or weaving themselves between the rafters. Sometimes she would find her name scratched lightly into the walls, as if someone had tried to remember her long before she was born. But the mirrors, they remained untouched. Until one day, just past dusk, Nala stood near the hallway that led to her father's room and noticed something peculiar. The mirror at the end of the corridor, the tall one behind the crimson cloth, was uncovered. Only slightly. A sliver of glass peeked out from beneath the fabric, catching the dying light of the setting sun. Just a sliver, but it was enough for Nala to see something that made her blood run still. Her father stood across the room reading by candlelight. But his reflection, in the sliver, was facing her. Not moving. Not blinking. Just staring straight ahead, its eyes wide and dark. She gasped. The sound echoed too loud in the hallway. Her father looked up. "What is it?" he called gently. She looked from the sliver of mirror to him. He hadn't moved. "Nothing," she lied. "I thought I saw something in the shadows." He nodded, not suspicious but tired. "The house is full of them." That night, Nala couldn't sleep. She kept hearing small shifts of fabric in the hallway, like something brushing against curtains. The house creaked more than usual. The shadows in the corners seemed to breathe. Her candle flickered oddly, not from wind for there was none, but as if something inside it pulsed against her presence. Just past midnight she rose. She couldn't stop thinking about the mirror. She padded down the hall barefoot, careful not to wake her father, though the house seemed to hush as she walked as if holding its breath. The mirror stood tall at the end, still veiled in red cloth. She reached for it slowly. Her fingers closed around the edge. She hesitated, whispering to herself, "Just a quick look. Nothing will happen." She pulled the cloth down. It crumpled at her feet. For a moment she stared into the glass. And saw nothing. No reflection. No hallway. No self. Just fog. Swirling, dark fog rolling like smoke against a wall. It wasn't absence. It was something. Like the mirror was filled with a room she couldn't reach. Then, a crack. A thin, jagged line shot across the center of the glass. She gasped and stumbled backward. Behind her, something hissed. Not a snake. Not wind. Something with teeth. She spun around, but the hallway was empty. Only the quiet, waiting dark. When she looked back at the mirror, another crack had formed, this one diagonal. Together they made an X. From the center of that X, black liquid began to bead out, thick and slow, like sap. She ran. She didn't stop until she was under her blanket, heart pounding, face burning, pulse a hammer in her throat. She didn't tell her father. Not the next morning, not the one after. But the mirror remained broken. Covered again, but this time the cloth was damp, darker at the center, like it had absorbed something it shouldn't have. That day she started paying more attention to her father's shadow. It wasn't something she meant to do. Just happened. She noticed first at the kitchen table while he prepared her tea. He reached for the clay cup with his left hand. His shadow reached with its right. She blinked, rubbed her eyes, but the difference held for a full second before sinking again. The next day it happened again, in the garden this time. He bent to water the plants. His shadow stood upright, motionless, watching her. She backed away slowly and didn't return until sunset. The fear grew inside her like a vine, not sudden but spreading, wrapping around her breath, her thoughts, her sleep. Her dreams became fevered, long corridors full of mirrors with no reflections, doors opening without hands, her father's voice calling from behind walls that did not exist. One night, while pretending to sleep, she watched from beneath half-lowered eyelids as her father stood at the foot of her bed. He was holding the red cloth from the mirror. But it wasn't him, not entirely. His mouth moved too fast, like flickering flame. And the shadow behind him. It didn't match. It loomed larger, taller, its head brushing the ceiling, its limbs longer than his. She closed her eyes tightly. When she opened them, he was gone. But a single word had been whispered into her ear, too low to be human. Nala. Not Esaisa. Not the name he always used. Her true name. And the next morning, every mirror in the house was double covered. Some had been sealed with paste and cloth. Others were turned to the wall entirely. That day her father didn't look at her once. She knew then what the shadows had been trying to tell her for years. This house didn't reflect because it couldn't. Because it wasn't built to. Because some houses aren't homes, they're containers. And sometimes the people who live in them aren't the only ones inside. That night, Nala sat in front of the broken mirror with a candle and whispered into it. Who am I? The mirror didn't answer. But the flame flickered sideways, not up. And from the wall behind her, a shape leaned just slightly forward. As if listening. The first time Nala heard it, she thought it was the wind. A low murmuring that pressed against her ear just as she was about to fall asleep. But when she sat up, the sound stopped. The room was still, the candle by her bedside nearly burnt to the base, its flame curling like a question mark. She lay back down, eyes wide, straining to hear again. Then it came, clearer this time. Not the wind. Her voice. But not her breath. Not her mind. A perfect imitation, as though someone had peeled her voice from her throat and was using it like a mask. It came from the far corner of the room, near the cracked mirror that now lay face down, covered by two cloths and a bowl of salt her father had quietly placed without explanation. She waited, holding her breath. Then it spoke again. I didn't mean to look, the voice said softly, just like hers, only a shade too smooth. It laughed. She flung the blanket off and lit a second candle with shaking hands, scanning the shadows. Nothing. Nothing but the usual odd folds of fabric hanging from the rafters and the uneven floorboards that creaked when no one stepped on them. By morning, she convinced herself it had been a dream. But the next night the voice returned. Nala, it whispered, do you remember the attic? They didn't have an attic. Not that she knew of. She didn't answer. But her heart beat so loudly she feared it would summon something worse. The voice giggled. You're listening now. That night her dreams changed. No longer the aimless wandering through corridors of mirrors and smoke. Now she saw the same room she slept in, only the ceiling was wrong, too low, too close. And on it something crawled. Not a spider. Not a person. A shape. Long arms. Bent knees. Fingers too many and too thin. It didn't fall. It didn't speak. Just watched. Its head would swivel in unnatural ways to follow her, no matter where she turned in the dream. And every time she woke up, her ceiling would be blank, but a line of fine dust would fall from the beams above her bed. And once, a long, thin scratch appeared on the wall, starting from the upper corner and stopping inches from the floor. She told her father. He was quiet for a long time, then set his carving knife down and looked her directly in the eyes for the first time in days. There are things in this house, he said carefully, that were never meant to hear your name. What does that mean? It means your voice is not just yours anymore. He said it as if it should make sense. As if it were simply one more rule of the house, like not stepping over thresholds without salt or never opening a book unless it opened first. She stared at him. There's something in my room. It sounds like me. I know. You knew and said nothing? If you don't speak to it, it loses power. What if it speaks to me? His hand shook. Then don't answer. That night, Nala moved her bed to the center of the room as far from corners as possible. She placed bowls of water at each corner and smeared charcoal symbols along the doorframe. Her father did not help. But before she went to sleep, he stood in her doorway with a bundle of dried leaves and muttered a word she didn't recognize. And then, without looking at her, he added, "Don't open the cellar door." What cellar door? He didn't respond. And that was how she learned about the door beneath the kitchen rug. The house didn't have stairs. At least she thought it didn't. But the next morning, when he left early to chop wood, she pulled the rug aside and found a square panel with a rusted iron ring set into the center. She tugged gently. It didn't move. She pressed her ear to the wood. Nothing. Then, breathing. Not like hers. Deeper. Heavier. As though something large slept just beneath the floorboards. She slammed the rug back down and didn't touch it again. But at night, the voice grew bolder. It mimicked her speech from earlier that day. Her laughter. Her private thoughts. You wondered if your father is even your father, it whispered. You remembered your mother's face again. You wanted to run into the forest and never come back. It knew things no one else could. Even the shadows in the corners seemed to lean in, curious. Then came the night it began to hum. Not words. The same one her father sometimes hummed absent-mindedly when carving. A song with no known lyrics, but a deep rhythm that echoed in her bones. She bit her hand to keep from crying. That night the dream came again. The ceiling creature was closer now. It didn't move. It hung upside down, face to face with her. Only its face was hers. Her mouth, her eyes. But wide. Wrong. Too many teeth behind the smile. When she woke, the candle was out. A handprint of ash marked the wall beside her head. Her father began sleeping outside her door, though he never admitted why. Every morning he would check the cellar rug and rescatter the salt in a circle around the hearth. He carved faster now, with shavings littering every room. When she asked what he was making, he only said, "A shape to hold it back." And still the voice kept speaking. "You'll open it one day," it purred. "You want to. You need to." She screamed at it once, too tired to follow the rule. "Shut up." And the entire room went still. The air thickened. Then the voice said, no longer in her tone but in her mother's, "That's not how I raised you." Nala fell to the floor. She could not remember her mother's voice clearly. But she knew that wasn't it. And yet, it still made her weep. The next morning she found one of her old toys, a clay doll her father had long since hidden, placed neatly on her bed. Its face had been scraped clean. A mirror shard placed in the center of its chest. She held it for a moment, breath shallow. Then she heard a soft knock. Not at the door. From under the floor. Just once. As if something below had reached the bottom of a staircase. Waiting. It began with a sacrifice. A storm had threatened the hills for 3 days, but the rains never came. The village's wells had begun to taste of copper, and the birds had flown too far north. The elders whispered about imbalance, about unseen things being disturbed. And Nala's father, though rarely involved in village matters, volunteered to prepare the offering himself. A goat. Gray with a single black stripe down its spine. Quiet. Unblinking. Nala stood near the outer wall of their home when he brought it back. The goat didn't bleat. Didn't try to resist the rope around its neck. It just looked at her. And something about its eyes made her stomach twist. That night, her father lit a small fire in the hearth and scattered dried herbs in a slow spiral around the room. He murmured as he worked, voice low, like he wasn't speaking words so much as remembering them. He lit no candles. The windows were covered. The smell of the herbs was heavy, almost metallic. The goat stood silently in the middle of the room, tethered to a wooden beam. Nala watched from the corner. She wasn't afraid, not yet. But something about the silence felt wrong. Like the house had inhaled and wasn't ready to let go. She turned to speak to her father. And the goat spoke first. It turned its head slowly, calmly, and looked her full in the eyes. "He's not your real father," it said. The words were clear. No stutter. No animal mimicry. Not a dream. Nala froze. Her heart did not race. It simply stopped. Everything inside her dropped low, like her bones remembered gravity all at once. She stared at the goat, waiting for it to do something else, to move, to change, to reveal itself as anything but what it appeared. But it only blinked. Her mouth opened to call her father, but he was already standing behind her, knife in hand. "What did it say?" he asked. She faltered. "It. What did it say?" She looked at him. His face was hard to read. Flat. But his eyes were terrified. She didn't answer. Her father stepped forward. The goat bleated once, softly. And then, without a word, he ended it. The fire hissed as blood soaked the circle. Nala didn't sleep that night. The next morning the goat was gone. No remains. No ashes. Not even blood on the floor. When she asked, her father only said, "It was accepted." But later that day, while sweeping near the back of the house, she found the heart. Still warm. Still pulsing. Buried in a shallow dish beneath the roots of the fig tree, surrounded by salt and feathers. That was the beginning of the drawings. She didn't remember doing them at first. Just woke up to the smell of charcoal and a dull ache in her fingers. Her bedroom wall bore long, looping symbols. Circles pierced with thorns, eyes inside hands, spirals wrapped in flame. She tried to scrub them off. They returned the next day. This time in her own handwriting, scratched into the underside of her bed. She stopped sleeping. Or tried to. But exhaustion is a cruel gatekeeper. And soon she began waking in new places. On the kitchen floor. By the cellar door. Once, standing barefoot in the garden, knife in hand, whispering in a voice not hers. Her dreams were worse. Always the same voice calling her from below. And always her reflection, distorted, smiling, watching her from dark puddles, from pots of water, from the polished blade of her father's carving knife. And now the symbols were everywhere. In the soot above the fireplace. Etched into the wood of the doorframe. Even burnt faintly into the hem of her nightdress. She asked him again. "Am I your daughter?" Her father closed his eyes. "You are mine." "That's not what I asked." "You are what I have protected." "That's not the same either." He said nothing. But that night he locked his room. And she woke up with inked fingers and her pillowcase torn in half. The drawings began to vibrate faintly. Humming. Only when she touched them. As if they were unfinished, as if they were waiting. One day while walking past the old shed, she saw a shadow inside. Her shape, her walk. But it moved in reverse, like a memory being played backward. It smiled. And whispered in the goat's voice, "Do you remember the river? Where your name was taken?" She did not remember a river. But later that night she found mud on her feet. And a single lily in her hand. She had not left the house. But her fingers smelled of silt. And her lips tasted like old water. Then came the scratching. From inside the walls. At first she thought it was rats. But the rhythm, always 3 scratches, pause, then 2 more, was too steady. Too deliberate. And the language was beginning to make sense. Not fully. But enough. She translated one phrase carved beneath her mattress. "Let her remember before the door opens." She copied it down, showed it to her father. He went pale. "Where did you learn that?" "I didn't. I wrote it in my sleep." He held her face between his hands then, his touch softer than it had ever been. "You are starting to return." "To what?" He shook his head. "Something older than this place." That night she heard the voice again. Only it wasn't speaking from the corner anymore. It was inside her. Not a possession. Remembering. "You are not what he raised," it whispered gently. "You are what he hid." The next morning she found a new mark beneath her collarbone. A sigil. Not drawn. Branded. Her skin stung to touch it. Her blood felt different. She lit a candle, placed a bowl of water beside it, and watched her reflection flicker. "I am Nala," she whispered. And her reflection answered in her own voice, "Not anymore." The floor had always creaked strangely in the back room. It was the smallest in the house, used for storing old firewood and broken furniture. Nala had never spent much time there. It was colder than the rest of the home, as if the sun refused to touch it even at noon. But now she was desperate to keep herself busy. After the speaking goat, the shifting mirrors, the dreams that left her whispering in her sleep, she needed to move, to scrub, to do. So she cleaned. She swept the corners of every room. She dusted the frames of windows that hadn't been opened in years. When she came to the back room she hesitated at the doorway. The wood groaned beneath her, protesting her presence like an old man roused too early from sleep. The air smelled thick. Musty. But something else too, metallic. She moved the broken chairs aside. Pushed away the half-rotted bundles of dried grass and forgotten baskets. And then, as she knelt to sweep beneath a warped bench, her hand pressed against the floor and felt it. Hollow. Just one plank. about the length of her forearm. When she tapped it, the sound echoed strangely beneath. She ran her fingers along the edge until she found the nails. Old, rusted, weak. It didn't take much. Just a little pressure from the fireplace poker, and the plank popped up with a creak like a whimper. A draft of air rose to meet her, thick and cold. And then the smell hit. Old blood. She gagged. Not because of the scent, but because her body recognized it. Something inside her remembered. It wasn't fresh, not even close. But the copper bite of it filled her mouth like a memory. She leaned over the opening. A shallow cavity. No more than 2 feet deep, but packed tightly with soil that had darkened to the color of dried rust. And in the center, poking up through the filth, were bones. Small ones. Human. She didn't scream. She reached down slowly and pulled one free. It was a finger bone. Cling. As if something had licked it dry before burial. She dropped it and stood. She didn't knock on his door. She pushed it open and stepped inside. Her father sat at his small table, sharpening his carving knife. "Tell me," she said. He didn't look up. "I kept it sleeping for years," he said softly. "You woke it. What is it?" His hand stilled. "Not what? Who?" She waited. He finally raised his eyes to hers. "You." Her breath caught. He rose from the chair, slow and heavy. His face was older than she remembered. The years seemed to have sunk into his bones in the span of a single sentence. "You think you were born in that storm? You think the shadows came after?" She nodded once. "They didn't. You brought the storm with you. The house didn't change. You did. The moment you cried." He walked past her toward the back room. She followed, heart hammering. He stopped at the open hole. "That blood isn't from a stranger," he said. She stared at him. "You killed someone?" "No. You did. A long time ago." Her mouth dried. "You're lying." He shook his head. "She came before you. Wore your face. Had your voice. But something inside her broke loose before she could finish becoming. What was she? A version of you. A vessel that opened too soon. She tore through this house like fire." His voice trembled just slightly. "I couldn't destroy her. So I sealed her. Beneath the floor, with symbols carved in ash and salt. I built the room around her. I kept it locked. And for years, it worked." Nala stepped back. "You knew this whole time? You knew what I was becoming. You're not her. Not yet. But you've begun." "What wakes it?" she whispered. He looked at her, eyes full of something between love and terror. "Memory." The word struck like a blow. She looked down at her hands. The charcoal stains. The drawings. The branded mark on her chest. "What do I do?" His voice cracked. "You must finish what she started, or bury her again." "But she's me." She was. Nala turned back toward the hole. The bones sat in the dirt like an accusation. She felt it then, a flicker in the pit of her spine, a warmth curling upward like a sleeping beast turning in its den. Something had begun to stir. And it was no longer satisfied with sleep. Ask ChatGPT. The day of the village ceremony arrived heavy with smoke and drums. Nala hadn't attended one since she was a child, always kept back by her father for safety. But this year they had insisted. The drought had deepened. Shadows stretched too long at dusk. Crops had withered without cause, and strange shapes were being seen in the trees. Whispers began to circulate that a cleansing was needed, that the old rites must return. So the villagers gathered, every household, every name-bearing soul, around the fire pit carved into the center of the red earth. And Nala stood among them, maskless, bare-faced under the sun. An elder approached her, holding something in both hands, a ceremonial mask carved of obsidian wood, smooth and dark with faint lines of gold running across the cheeks like veins. It shimmered slightly as if the wood remembered light from somewhere deeper than the sun. "This is for protection," the elder said, her voice brittle as bark. "So your spirit does not wander." The mask was light in her hands but thrummed faintly, like it had a heartbeat. When she looked up at her father, he hesitated. Just for a moment. But then he nodded. "Go ahead." She slipped it over her face. The world tilted. The colors drained, not into darkness but into something deeper. She could still see, but everything shimmered, doubled with ghost light, like she was seeing things not with her eyes, but through layers of something ancient and watching. The villagers looked strange now, like paper dolls walking over wet stone. Their outlines flickered, each one casting two shadows, one of flesh and one of something else. Something older. But when she turned toward her father, she froze. He stood still in the crowd, hands folded, eyes soft. But beneath the mask's new vision, his skin was ill-fitting. His outline pulsed irregularly, rippling like a veil over a hidden form. And what lay beneath was not human. His spine was longer than it should be, bending in places no spine should bend. His arms, though they looked normal in the sunlight, cast shadows that ended in claws. The top of his head curled back slightly, not hair but horns folded under skin. His mouth moved as if whispering prayers, but the mask heard something else. Not words. Just clicking. Like teeth. She gasped and took a step back. Her mask shimmered, responding to her fear. He looked directly at her. And for the first time she couldn't tell whether the man she had known all her life was looking back, or the thing beneath his skin. The drums kept beating. The crowd swayed and danced. But the sound was distant now, like it came from behind glass. Nala tried to pull the mask off, but her fingers slipped. The edges of the wood had melted against her skin. Not with fire but with fitting. As though the mask had grown roots the moment it touched her. She stumbled, blinded by truth. Everywhere she looked, people shimmered with layers. Some had small tears near their mouths, revealing little more than sorrow or grief. Others wore faces too well, masks of joy that split slightly at the edges, revealing envy, fear, or rot. She had never seen the village this way. She had never known how much everyone was hiding, even from themselves. The mask did not speak, but it knew. She turned back to her father. He had not moved. But his second shadow, it was no longer still. It writhed, slowly stretching toward her feet. She stepped back and finally found the edge of the mask. She gripped it hard and tore. It came off with a soft, wet sound. Air rushed back into her lungs. Color returned to the world, dull and sharp all at once. Her hands trembled. Her father approached slowly, concern on his face. But now she couldn't unsee it. The way his skin moved just a little too much when he blinked. The way his shadow curved in a direction the sun did not allow. He touched her shoulder. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. She did not answer. Because the mask had shown her too much. And it still pulsed in her hands. Like it knew her face too well. It rained the night Nala was born, the kind of storm the old women still spoke of in lowered voices. Lightning without thunder, wind without direction. Rain that tasted of iron. They said the river rose up to greet her, that the birds left the trees and did not return for a month. That every mirror in the village cracked, one by one, just before the cry of a newborn pierced the dark. She had always believed her father was there that night. That he had wrapped her in cloth and sung to her with shaking hands. That the look he carried, half terror, half sorrow, was simply the grief of a man who had lost his wife and been given a child he didn't know how to raise. But the truth was different. It began with a slip of the tongue. He had been carving again. Not the usual soft, round shapes he made for firewood. This one had sharp edges. Points. Something like a spiral that refused to close. Nala sat nearby, the mask from the village ceremony still hidden beneath her bed, pulsing faintly when she drew near. She couldn't wear it again. Not yet. But it had changed something in her, unlocked a layer of vision that didn't fully vanish when removed. She was watching her father, when he spoke to himself under his breath. She stirs earlier than expected. He said her blood would sleep longer. She froze. What did you say? He didn't answer. Who said? Who expected? He placed the carving down slowly. The mask began to thrum even from across the room. You were never supposed to remember this much. Answer me. He stood. The man who sired you is gone. Gone where? Gone the moment you were born. The words crashed into her like a wave. She staggered back. No, she whispered. He was taken. Taken. I took him. The room pulsed. The walls, soaked in years of quiet, wood and smoke, seemed to exhale. I needed a vessel, he said, voice calm now. Too calm. You were not born for life. You were carved. No. Yes. You were forged in the womb of a woman made to carry an old promise. The body was hers. But the seed, the shaping, was mine. You're not my father. Not by blood, he agreed. But I raised you. Fed you. Bound the shadows that would have torn you open too early. She shook her head, tears starting to blur her vision. You killed him. No. I wore him. A second skin. His mind shattered when he saw what came through with you. I offered him a choice. He screamed. I took his silence for consent. Stop. I built this house with rules to keep you from splitting too soon. The salt. The closed mirrors. The cellar door. All to delay your remembering. She remembered the blood beneath the floorboards. The bones. The voice that spoke in her sleep with her own laugh. You were never raising me, she whispered. You were growing me. His smile widened. and for a moment his skin did not hold. His face twitched just a flicker, but enough. A second mouth grinned beneath his chin, full of black teeth. "You are the door," he said. "And you're almost unlocked." Nala turned and ran. Outside, the wind had risen, wild and hot. The trees bent as if bowing to something unseen. The villagers were gathered near the edge of the forest, their faces strained with fear, their eyes darting toward the house she fled from. One woman stepped forward, the same elder who had given her the mask. She looked into Nala's eyes. "You see now, don't you?" Nala nodded slowly. The elder touched her forehead. "We always knew there was a shadow here. But we thought it was you. Not the one raising you. Why didn't anyone stop him? He walked like a man. Bleed like a man. But no soul shimmered from him. And still we doubted ourselves. Feared accusing the wrong one. I heard my voice, in the dark. My own laughter mocking me. What is inside me?" The elder didn't speak. Instead, she removed a charm from around her neck, a small disc of bone etched with flame, and pressed it into Nala's palm. "You are not the shadow. But the shadow loves you like its own. I don't understand. You were made to hold something ancient. But whether it uses you or you use it, that choice remains yours." Behind them, the door to the house swung open. The thing inside stepped out. It still looked like her father, but now the mask of humanity was slipping. Its arms were too long. Its eyes glowed faintly. Its tongue flicked out, tasting the air. The villagers stepped back. But Nala didn't. She reached into her satchel and pulled out the mask. It pulsed in her hands like a heartbeat. Her heartbeat. She placed it on. The world shifted. And she saw clearly. The demon's soul had cracked down the center, barely held together. A parasite with ancient purpose, long hidden in mortal skin. "I know your name now," she said, voice echoing deeper than it should. The demon froze. Nala stepped forward. "You raised me. You shaped me. But you forgot something." "What?" She smiled. "I was watching you too." And then, softly like a blade sliding into cloth, the mask whispered its own name. Nala spoke it aloud. The demon screamed, not in pain but in rage. And the wind howled as if trying to silence her. But it was too late. The vessel was awake. And the one who raised her would now learn what she had truly become. The ropes bit into Nala's wrists, thick and scratchy with old ash. She didn't fight them. Not as they dragged her to the old pyre platform at the edge of the forest. Not even as the wood was stacked high beneath her feet. The villagers moved quickly, some with hard eyes, others with trembling hands as though trying to convince themselves they were doing something holy, cleansing, necessary. Someone shouted, "For the safety of the village." Someone else, quieter, added, "Before she opens the door." The sun was dipping low, and the sky above them churned with gray clouds, though no storm had been forecast. Nala stood barefoot on the pyre, arms bound to the blackened posts behind her. The elder who had once offered her the mask now looked away, lips pressed tight. A young boy, barely 10, approached with a torch. He was shaking. They had given the task to him, perhaps believing that innocence could spare guilt. Nala spoke softly. "Don't." He paused, eyes wide. "I'm not what he was," she whispered. "But I am what he feared." The boy dropped the torch before it reached the kindling. But someone else picked it up. Her father's voice came from the crowd. "She is not my child." He stood near the front now, though he didn't look the same. His limbs were too stiff, too balanced, like he was wearing the memory of how a body should move, not the instincts. The villagers didn't notice. Not all of them. But Nala did. His voice was too smooth, too even, like it remembered what her father sounded like, but not the breaks between words. The torch dropped. Flames raced across the wood. Nala closed her eyes. She felt the heat rise, curling around her legs, licking her arms, roaring to life beneath her. But it didn't touch her. Not truly. The fire bent. Not outward, not away from the pyre, but around her. The flames curved like they were wrapping themselves in her presence, not consuming her but recognizing something, obeying something. The ropes blackened, cracked, fell away. The villagers gasped. Nala stepped forward untouched as the fire parted for her bare feet. The sky above cracked with sudden thunder. And then the house, her house, exploded from within, not with flame but with sound. A low, ancient groan that turned the air heavy. The roof blasted off in shards. The walls crumbled into smoke. And from the wreckage rose the thing that had worn her father's face. It was no longer pretending. Its body stretched tall, dark, skin like cracked stone. Its arms split at the elbows, forming long, clawed extensions. Its face, if it could be called that, held too many eyes all fixed on her. And then it spoke. In her father's voice. Nala? She froze. Something inside her wavered. But the fire at her feet surged again, coiling gently up her ankles like vines. Not burning. Beckoning. She took another step forward. You raised me, she said. But not as a daughter. As a key. The demon grinned with 1,000 teeth. You were born for a door that doesn't open with hands. And you forgot, she said louder now, that the lock changes shape. The sky split. The villagers scattered. Some fell to their knees. Others ran for the hills, shrieking of curses, of gods, of the end. But Nala didn't run. The demon lunged, and the fire rose with her. It wrapped around her shoulders like a cloak, spun upward from her palms, flickering into ancient shapes, the very same symbols she used to draw in her sleep. They shimmered in the air, glowing gold, and slammed into the demon's chest. It howled. But even its scream bent around her. Not with pain. With reverence. Because she was no longer just a vessel. She was the fire they tried to kill. And it had made its choice. Asked ChatGPT. The earth was still trembling. The wind screamed through the trees like it had lost something or was about to. Ash rained from the sky in soft flakes, catching the edges of Nala's hair, but she didn't move. She stood firm in the center of the clearing, fire flickering harmlessly at her feet, her hands still glowing with the golden residue of symbols she hadn't learned but somehow always known. The demon was circling her now, his mouth split too wide, its voice still echoing in her father's stolen tone. You were never meant to remember. But something inside her had already broken free. Not violently. Like a seed cracking open. A memory that had always been there, just beneath the surface. It came in pieces, soft and wet like early morning fog. A hand clutching hers, weak and blood-slick. The sound of rain pounding on a wooden roof. Her own newborn wail being swallowed by the dark. And her mother. Coughing. Whispering. One word. A name. She had never understood it until now. As a child, it was just a strange hum in the back of her mind, a lullaby she never heard but always felt. But now, standing in fire and ash, with the thing that wore her father's skin lunging at her, she knew. The name wasn't hers. It was her. A name shaped like flame, formed of syllables not meant for ordinary tongues. Her mother had spoken it not to label her, but to lock her. To protect the world from something too old, too waiting. It was both a gift and a seal. And now she had the power to break it. Or claim it. The demon screamed, charging forward, claws drawn wide. Time slowed. The fire around her curved inward, no longer dancing but kneeling. And Nala raised her hand. She said the name. Not loudly. It didn't need to be loud. The syllables split the air like a blade through silk. Every tree in the forest bent as if bowing. The earth under her feet pulsed once, twice, and then went utterly still. The demon froze mid-leap. Its limbs locked in place, stretched grotesquely like a puppet yanked too hard. Its claws hung inches from her throat, but could not reach. Its mouth opened wide to roar, but no sound came. Just stillness. Its eyes, far too many to count, blinked all at once. And then wept smoke. Because it recognized the name. Because it knew that name. And because that name had not been forgotten, it had been waiting. The villagers, many still hidden behind trees and rocks, crept slowly from their shelters. Their eyes were wide with disbelief. They saw Nala surrounded by fire that did not burn. They saw the demon paralyzed, held mid-motion like an insect pinned in glass. And they saw the glow coming from her chest, faint, golden, radiant through the torn fabric of her dress. A child cried softly. Then a woman fell to her knees. One by one they began to understand. She's not the demon, someone whispered. Another voice echoed, she sealed it. And then another, she saved us. Nala turned toward the villagers. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. They could see it in her eyes now. Something fierce. Something divine. Not monstrous but eternal. She walked up to the frozen demon and placed her hand on its chest. The flesh cracked beneath her touch as if it was made of dried mud. Smoke leaked from the fractures, curling upward like apologies. You wore his face, she said softly. But I carry his silence. She pressed harder. The name burned again on her tongue, not as a weapon, but as truth. The demon's form shattered like glass dropped in snow. It did not scream. It yielded. The fire dimmed. The sky cleared. And Nala, girl, key, seal breaker, stood alone in the ashes of what had once been her shadow. But she was not empty. She was full. The fire burned long into the night. It rose high, loud and alive, eating through the beams of the house that had once held her childhood, her fears, her sleepless nights. The same house that had once held the bones beneath the floorboards. The same house where a demon had worn her father's face for years, calling her daughter, calling her dangerous, shaping her into a vessel for something she had never asked to carry. Now it was all flames. Nala stood barefoot on the edge of the dirt path, the golden glow still faint on her skin but fading. The firelight danced in her eyes, but her face was unreadable. She didn't cry. She didn't blink. She didn't move. Behind her, the villagers stood in silence. No chants. No prayers. No accusations. No one called her Asisa, now. Not after what they'd seen. She had walked through flame. Spoken a name older than memory. Held back a demon with nothing but her voice and her truth. And now she simply stood watching the house die. The walls groaned. The roof caved inward with a hiss and crash. Embers leapt like spirits into the night sky, vanishing one by one like they were being counted. A woman whispered, "She's not human." Another said, "She's more than that." A child asked, "Will the fire touch her?" But none dared approach. The fire should have made her sweat. But it didn't. The heat bent away from her skin, curling back on itself, like it remembered her name and knew better. She remembered it too. The name her mother had whispered as she died. It wasn't just a word. It had become her shape. The last beam of the house fell, sending up a tower of sparks. Within them, for a heartbeat, a figure seemed to rise, tall, thin, cracked with shadow, its eyes the color of dying coals. And then it was gone. Some say it was the demon, screaming one last time before the fire swallowed it whole. Others say it never truly left. That it lingers now in the ash, watching her the way it used to, silent, patient, waiting. But Nala did not flinch. She stepped forward slowly, until her bare feet touched the edge of the scorched earth where the house had once stood. She reached down and picked up a single shard of wood that had escaped the flames. It was smooth and blackened, the carving marks still barely visible. She turned it over in her hand. It had once been part of a cradle. Now it was just charcoal. She let it fall. The fire hissed once more and then began to die down, as if the house had nothing more to offer. Still Nala did not speak. There was nothing left to say. The villagers began to back away, unsure whether to bow, to apologize, or to run. Some did all three. She didn't stop them. She knew what they saw now. Not a girl. Not a demon. Something in between. Something forged. Some would go on to say she was protected by spirits, that the flames now whispered her name when they rose too high. Some would place charms at the edge of their land, hoping to keep her favor. Others would never speak her name again, too afraid it might summon the fire itself. But Nala didn't care. She had no interest in becoming their legend. She had watched her house burn. Watched the creature who raised her perish in the flames it could no longer command. And in its ashes she had not found peace. But she had found clarity. She turned away from the ruins, the last of the embers glowing behind her like stars in a dying sky. And without a word she walked into the night. Some say she left the village for good. Others say she returns once a year barefoot, to stand by the ashes and whisper her own name. To remind whatever still lingers that it no longer owns her. Because she is not Asisa. Not anymore. She is the girl who watched the house burn, and did not burn with it.